Amelia Earhart, Leonardo da Vinci, Bill Gates. These people are learners, autodidacts, Renaissance men and women. Welcome to the Zander Show, where we meet with ordinary people who have learned to live extraordinary lives.
Welcome to the Zander Show, where we meet with extraordinary people to understand the mindsets and tools they use to facilitate learning. This episode features an interview with prominent strategist and writer Ryan Holiday. I became familiar with Ryan's work when I was suggested his reading list, in which he sends out a monthly list of books that he highly recommends. 4 years later, Ryan's reading list remains one of the few newsletters that I am grateful to receive. But more than just being a prolific reader, Ryan is a best-selling author and strategist. He has published 3 books: Trust Me, I'm Lying, Confessions of a Media Manipulator, Growth Hacker Marketing, and my personal favorite, The Obstacle is the Way. In the interview, we discuss how Ryan has trained himself to become the influential media strategist that he is today. He's developed marketing campaigns for best-selling authors including the controversial Tucker Max, the best-selling author Robert Greene, the human guinea pig Tim Ferriss, and coach Tony Robbins. But Ryan wasn't born successful. What I find especially compelling is how Ryan describes taking all of the little steps and the accompanying failures along the way. He dropped out of college at 19 to apprentice under Robert Greene, became the youngest ever director of marketing at American Apparel, and has never stopped refining his craft. Ryan's most recent book, The Obstacle is the Way, is a practical guide to Stoic philosophy, to which Ryan attributes much of his perseverance and success. I really admire the no-drama approach with which Ryan tackles challenges, cultivates resilience, and calm. There's a great deal to be learned from Ryan, not just about marketing and strategy, but about simple tools to live one's life by. I hope you enjoy this interview with Ryan Holiday. Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It's really a pleasure and an honor to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's always good to talk to you.
Yeah. I've been a big fan and admirer of your work for 2 or 3 years since I first came across probably your reading list. So maybe let's start with that. I want to go into a lot of different aspects. I mean, one of the things I admire about you is sort of the diversity of disciplines and domains you play in. Mm-hmm. But let's start with your reading list, because that seems like such a... I get so many emails, of course we all do, and one of the very few that I'm really excited to receive on a list every single month is the books that you recommend.
Yeah, so that came about. Someone had told me that having an email list is really important, and I remember thinking, okay, but why would anyone just sign up for emails from me? I'm a nobody. And so this would have been 6 or 7 years ago. And so I remember thinking, well, one day I want to be a writer and I would like people to buy my books. But I haven't written anything yet. So the best way to get an audience of readers would be to recommend other books to people. And if I did this for a really, really long time, I thought one day I could get these people. I could also recommend one of my books and they wouldn't immediately unsubscribe. And that's sort of what happened. And originally it wasn't even an email list. You were just supposed to send me an email and I would BCC you on the monthly recommendations. And pretty soon, apparently you can only email like 250 people on Gmail at one time. So I crossed that pretty quickly. And, it started at 0 and now it's at almost 50,000 people. And I all I do is send out reading recommendations once a month. And it's been really, really fun. I get people from all over the world subscribe, people who are really old, people who are really young, people who work in publishing, people who hate me but like my book recommendation. So it's been a very interesting process.
That last one is particularly just hysterical. People
they're like, look, I would never read any of your books, but I like your book recommendations. So I'm like, okay, I'll take it.
That's fabulous. A couple of follow-up questions. strategic thinking, right? So how old were you 6 or 7 years ago when you first sort of came up with this idea?
In my early 20s, I guess.
And
At 21, 22, something like that.
And how did you think, okay, at some point I want to be a writer, and then at some point I'm going to want to be able to tell people about my books, and then continue it for almost the last decade?
Well, I guess it wasn't so much like, I guess I was a writer in that I would write things online, but I wanted to be an author. Like, I wanted to write books, but I knew I didn't have a book yet, and I didn't have anything I felt qualified to write a book about. So it was really like, okay, I know this is what I want to do in the future, but I'm not there yet. How do I lay the groundwork for that? So that's sort of the strategic idea, number one. The actual tactical execution of it, doing it for 6 or 7 years, I mean, it's a lot easier than you would think. I read every month because I like reading. Then I recommend those books to people who are like me. I get a little bit of revenue from Amazon affiliate, not as much as you'd think. And then the way I used to think about it was, it pays for my reading habit. Like, I can basically comfortably buy any book that I ever see that I was considering buying, and I know that it's basically just coming out. I know I could probably convince enough other people to buy it afterwards that I could break even.
Huh. Yeah, that long-term thinking, that willingness to, start something not knowing that the outcome is guaranteed, and then continue forward because both you love it and because you see that there's long-term potential for you.
Well, sure. Look, and look, if I'd started the list and one person had subscribed, and then a year later there was only 5 more people on the list, I'd probably have gone like, hey, is this a good use of my time? But what you do is you have an idea, you try something, you see if there's a response, you put some work into it, and it grew. It didn't grow incredibly quickly. I would say, like, for the first, like, I remember, so I started it in, let's say, like, 2009, maybe 2008. And then by like 2011, when I was selling my first book to a publisher and I was writing my book proposal, the list was like 3,000 or 4,000 people. So, like, it did not grow massively at first. Like, it doubled in size last year, but, like, that was 6 or 7 years into it. But, like, it was comfortably validated. Like, it wasn't as if I was struggling in obscurity and then getting zero of encouragement.
Mm-hmm. So just responding to that positive feedback and then building based on that momentum.
Right.
I've heard you say that you always wanted to be a writer. And now you're extremely prolific. Of course, 3 books and just so many articles every month, every year. Where did that initial drive, that passion for writing come from?
I honestly have no idea. And I don't know if I always wanted to be a writer. I guess when I say that, I mean, like, for most of my adult life, I wanted to be one. Or, like, it wasn't as if I was 10 and I dreamed of being a novelist. Like, I don't have a great memory of my childhood in terms of, like, I don't vividly recall wanting that. I knew I was always probably attracted to the idea, but I would say, starting late high school, in college, I really started loving writing. I didn't know if I was good enough or there was actually a career in it, but, like, I was attracted to it. And then so the first step that I took was to surround myself by other writers. I worked for writers as, like, an assistant, as a research assistant. And then that sort of became my world. And then it became much more natural that I would then one day myself write a book. So that's a very different path than, say, like, knowing you're always going to be a writer, training for it, getting an MFA in it. That wasn't my path.
Totally. So let's go back to your path a little bit in terms of you dropped out of college. Actually, even before that. So you grew up. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Northern California, right outside Sacramento. Okay.
And you went to college in Southern California?
Yes.
Yeah. And then tell me about the experience of dropping out of college.
So I'd started working for a writer when I was in college. His name is Tucker Max. He's a very sort of controversial writer. And through him, I met another writer, Robert Greene. And I was working for both of them. And I also had an internship the summer of my sophomore year that was going really well. And the guy who came to me and he said, hey, do you what do you think about not going back to college? You're doing a really good job. We have a job for you here. We would love, we would love for you to work for us. And I thought about it, and I worked on it, and I ended up taking the leap. But it wasn't so much like I dropped out of college and then I was going to discover what I wanted to do with my life. It was, again, I'd taken some positive steps. I had validation. And so the risk was a lot less than it maybe appears in retrospect or whatever. I could have always gone back to school. I just didn't know if that job would still be around. So I took it.
Yeah. I think it has been for me, certainly intimidating to look at someone like you who's been successful in a specific domain or a set of domains and say, I can't possibly see the path there, so I might as well not begin.
I think people have very high expectations for what the end result is going to be. There's a great quote from Ira Glass on This American Life, where he's talking about, the problem for creative people when they're young is that they're not very good, but they have very good taste. That's what makes them want to be creative, is their taste. Like, they want to be a musician. They're not very good at it because they just started, but they love great music and they have good taste in music. And so they feel bad, right? Because those two things don't match. I think it's that, like, people see the end result and they don't realize that there's a lot of intermediary steps that are not as flattering. And so, like, it seems in retrospect, like, of course, dropping out of college worked. Look at all the things I got, and I'm very grateful for them. But, like, it was more like, look, I'm doing this internship. It's going well. They've offered me a job. It wasn't like, I think the job I took, it was for $30,000. That's what I left college for. I didn't leave college to be a published author. I left college for a job making $30,000, which, as soon as I accepted the job and dropped out, was promptly renegotiated to a lower amount by another person. So it was like, it was only one or two steps ahead of where I was. My parents thought it was a terrible idea. So I think people get very caught up on where they want to end up, and they don't understand that you've got to eat some stuff on the way there.
That process and the patience sort of for those baby steps. Exactly. So you worked, I'm very familiar, of course, with Tucker Max's work and Robert Greene's work. And those are, both of them are best-selling authors multiple times over, and have worked in some interesting and potentially controversial spaces. So, I think particularly of the work that you did with Tucker, maybe, like, what is one of your favorite campaigns when you were working sort of to promote Tucker and his work that you're proud of, or that you think is, you get asked lots of questions about? Maybe you could tell us about that.
I'm proud of the stunts that I did with Tucker. I think a lot of them were really funny and crazy. We created a boycott around one of his books in the movie, and that was really fun. I'm more proud, so for Robert Greene is sold millions of books before I even met him. He'd been on the New York Times bestseller list, but when I did the campaign for Mastery, it was his first #1 New York Times bestseller. So, like, sometimes the things that people think, got the most attention, are not the ones you're actually personally the most proud of. Like, for me, it was, like, very cool to, like, give something to, or help create something with a mentor and an idol of mine that he'd not done previously. And I took a lot of pride in that.
Nice. Yeah. I just got done performing with the San Francisco Opera for 10 weeks, and I'm really grateful and proud of the experience.
That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. But it happened kind of by happenstance. It didn't really feel like something that I had earned. Whereas a lot of other things that I've worked much harder on to get there don't sound as impressive as, performing with the San Francisco Opera. So let's look at Mastery then. What did you do to get Mastery #1 New York Times bestseller?
It was a big thing. It was, first, we built an email list for Robert, which he'd never had before. A few years previous, I'd helped him get control of his Facebook accounts, which we'd grown into having millions and millions of fans. It was, I worked on that book for 3 years, something like that. Like, I was the research assistant first, and then I did the marketing for it. It was really, that's a book that everyone is interested in mastery, but really people are interested in mastery in their specific field. And so a lot of the marketing on that book was about, finding the specific domains of mastery that are inside it breaking those pieces out and introducing those to those communities. So, he talks about Freddie Roach, the boxing coach in there. So that's an excerpt that we're going to run on a boxing site. He talks about fighter pilots. So what are we going to run on in a military community? He talks about, Temple Grandin, who's an animal rights activist. What can we put there? So it's really about taking this book, which I think is a masterpiece, collectively, and then breaking it down into tinier, smaller pieces and working on it that way.
Again, that actually puts me in mind of this same theme we're playing around, which is doing the work, essentially showing up. And I mean, it's much easier to deface a billboard than it is to contact Temple Grandin and research Freddie Roach and figure out all these subsets that mastery could appeal to. But that was the work required to get Robert's book to #1 New York Times.
Yeah, exactly. And look, it's also about looking at the sort of the loopholes, right? Like the book hit #1 on the monthly list, but not the weekly list, but they're exactly the same to normal people. And it's about identifying those sort of opportunities and jumping on them.
And what gives you that willingness to keep trying to, I mean, because I'm sure there's lots of failures that come along with that, or a lot of, getting stumped and having to think through something again. The persistence, where does that come from for you? Is that just trained, or is that some, I mean,
yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it comes from somewhere so much as it's been the only thing that's ever worked for me. Like I rarely find, these massive breakthroughs that change everything. And like, I don't really believe in epiphanies. I don't really believe in inspiration. I think it's the amount of energy and work and hours that you throw at something.
I've heard you say and write when someone asks you, when are you working, that you're always working.
Yeah. And look, I don't necessarily know if that's the best thing, and it's something I think about a lot, but for me, it's like I think when I look at my books, whatever success they've had, I don't look at them as being like these feats of genius or something. I see them as a function of the time and energy that I was willing to put in it. And I would guess that I put more into it than, other people who came before me, and that's why they did what they did. So I've always seen that as being my asset.
You've written in several different domains, right? So your first book, Trust Me, I'm Lying, all about media manipulation and getting press. And then your second book, Growth Hacker Marketing, was related, the future of PR, the future of marketing. But then your third book, The Obstacle is the Way, is sort of, at least conceivably, totally different. It's about philosophy and practical tools that people can use to live more fulfilled lives. So maybe let's walk through sort of the progression across all three of those first.
So look, the first book was, I actually got, it's weird. I think people see them as being part of some, evolution or whatever. When it's in fact the exact opposite. The first offer I ever got for a book was, it was from a very small publisher, to do a book on Stoicism. And I turned it down. I didn't think I was ready. I actually got some great advice from Robert Greene about it, but I didn't write that book. And I'm glad that I didn't. And so Trust Me, I'm Lying was the first book idea that I had that I thought was really timely and I thought would get attention. I thought would do well. And I thought it wasn't the book that I think I told my editor, is like, not necessarily the book that I want to write, but it's the book that I have to write. So I felt very motivated to do it. And I thought that it was important. And then and then actually the week that book came out, I sold the proposal for Trust Me, I'm Lying. So it went very, very fast. For Obstacles Away. So right after Trust Me, I'm Lying came out, I was ready to move on to the Stoicism book, which I'd been thinking about for a long time. And then it happened that in between, the growth hacking book idea came up from an article that I'd written, and then that book came out first. So people tend to, it can be really easy to create a story or a narrative from 3 events that seem connected, but in fact, reality is the opposite of that story, as much as it could possibly be, right? So it's more like, look, you have an idea for a book, you throw it out there, you see who's interested in buying it or reading it, and then also just life intervenes, and it just happened in this case that's how the whole project shook out.
How have you seen your writing style evolve over time?
I would hope that in a weird way you become more confident as a writer, and then you become more confident and then your writing gets more humble. That's sort of like the paradox. I think when you're younger and you're insecure, you feel like you have to over-explain everything. You feel like it's incredibly urgent and people have to listen, and you want to grab them and shake them until they hear it or whatever. And I think, like, because I'm already working on my next 2 books, and I feel like I'm getting a little bit less intense. It's not that I care less, I care more, but I feel less insecure about it. So I'm able to sit back and be a little calmer and more reflective about it. So I would say, I hope my writing has gotten better stylistically. I hope I've gotten, more skilled and insightful in terms of what I see and how I explain it. But then also I hope that I feel like I've come into my own maybe a little bit, or wherever I am on that journey, I hope it's further along.
And who do you write for?
I write for myself first and foremost. Like I use the second person a lot. Like I say the word you, like you should, or you got to be careful that, whatever. But that you is often directed at me. I feel like writing can be a dialogue with yourself, or a younger version of yourself, or a weaker version of yourself. So I feel like that's a big part of it. Often though, like when I'm writing a book, I'll try to identify someone in my life, or someone somebody that I know or that I've interacted with that I feel really needs to hear this thing, and I try to direct the book towards them.
Let's go into Obstacle is the Way. Your most recent book. I want to come back to, of course, the 2 books that you have in progress. But what was the inspiration? I mean, that was the book that you sold, or that you wanted to write, and that you sold after your first one came out.
So the inspiration was Stoic philosophy, right? I read Meditations when I was 19 or 20 years old, and it just blew my mind. And it was this, and I remember even like probably the first or second time I read it, I was like, this is so amazing. I want to do something like this, or I want to do something, as good as this, or connected to this or something. What it really became afterwards, though, as it helped my life, and I became, I got more experience, and I tested the things in real life, and whatever. I think what happened was I realized that the originals were so good that I needed to come up with a unique spin or take on it, or else there was no reason to read what I was writing. And so I always wanted to write a book about Stoicism, but the one that I got offered in 2008 or 2009 or whatever was would have been very, very different than what I wrote when I sat down and started in 2013, right? And I think that's when I started. I think I started in like January 2013, maybe December of 2013. But that book was the result of a lot of thinking and a lot of reading, and realizing what I saw was the problem with a lot of philosophical texts, and wanting to do something different and better.
What is the problem with a lot of philosophical texts, in your opinion?
Well, first off, you read a philosophical book from 2,000 years ago and you're reading it now. The fact that it's 2,000 years old adds a lot of weight to it that it's impossible to recreate now, right? So that's a big part of it. The other part of it is people just write books that are derivative of the other books. And so there's no value there. Or, 3 people rip off the philosophy of those books and then they call it their own. So I didn't want to do any of that. I realized that most people don't give two craps about philosophy. They don't think it's what they need, or they don't think it's what they care about. So what they do care about is that they have problems or difficulties and they're struggling with those. So when I wrote Obstacle, I was thinking, okay, I think Stoicism is the solution to a lot of problems. What's the most effective way to convince people of that? And I realized that it's stories. People want examples of times that someone has used this way of thinking and that there's some sort of proof or evidence that it actually made a difference. And so that's the way that I structured the book.
Another piece of that I really admire is the lots of different stories, some of which maybe a specific reader isn't going to be able to relate to, but so many from so many generations and disciplines that there's something in there for everybody. There's a tool or a story that will catch a wide variety of people's interests and attentions.
Yeah. I try, in my writing, I try you try for as wide a reach as possible, and you try to keep things as exciting and as interesting as possible.
So what are your next two books? What are you working on next?
I really, really don't talk about books while I'm writing them. Just for two reasons, not because I'm being like secretive or I think it'll let the cat out of the bag, but like, I really feel like, one, I feel like if I were to tell you the idea, since not done, it won't be as good as it could be. So I'm introducing you to the idea before it's finished. So that's reason number one for the rule.
Nice.
Reason number two is if I tell you, if I go around talking about the idea too publicly, in this sort of world of social media, you get a lot of credit for something that you also haven't done yet. And so that I think about that too. I think about, look, I want you to see the final product and I want you to care about it when I've earned that from you. And I didn't really tell people that I was writing a book about Stoicism until it was on the shelves, and that's sort of the rule I like to follow.
Nice. That's really clean. I feel like, I know for me, for example, I share things that I'm working on in progress. And as you say that, I totally acknowledge I get credit for things that I haven't actually executed on yet.
Yeah. And look, that makes it easier to, when it gets hard, to walk away and still feel good about yourself, which is great. Like, people should feel good about themselves, but like, I want to keep the pressure on myself to get it to where I need to be.
And what do you mean by pressure in that context?
Look, writing a book is not easy, and writing a great book is even harder. And I don't even know if I've done it yet, ever. But the idea that it's going to come naturally or easy is not something I believe in. I feel like you've got to keep very high standards, and the more people are patting you on the back, the easier it is to start to believe that, to start to think, okay, I've done it, and we probably haven't.
So this drive that you have, I don't know if drive is the right word, but the willingness to go, the persistence, does that come from the Stoic philosophy? Does that come from just trial and error and seeing what works for you? Because it's such in speaking to you, in reading your work, you're gentle, sometimes in your writing you're loving, and yet there's that persistence, there's that grit. And I feel like that's something that you've spoken about a lot in various articles, and that you and I've talked about a little bit, but what makes that possible for you?
Well, that's what I love about Stoicism. Look, there's a lot of overlap between Stoicism and sort of Zen Buddhism, a lot more than people think. Being in the present, being mindful, letting go of things, accepting things. But what I love about Stoicism, and I love how Western Stoicism is, that these are people who accomplished things, who built the greatest civilizations and empires in the world, who feats of engineering, they built things that are still there. They wrote great works that we still read. I just find it much more relatable in a lot of ways. So I love that hard edge to Stoicism, that it's like, look, you've got this brief moment. It could be taken from you at any time, but you should still be the best person you could possibly be, and you should still follow your ambition as far as it'll take you, provided it doesn't become, not a positive. So I think for me, that's what it is. I believe all these things, but at the same time, I believe I have certain talents and certain skills, and I'm not going to waste them. I'm going to work on them. I think, like, the Stoics talk a lot about sort of the role that you're given in life, or the sort of fate that's befallen you, and you're not supposed to question it. You're supposed to work on it. You're supposed to take it and make the most of it, and that's what I hope to do.
That willingness to work, again, I mean, we keep coming back to a couple of just principles that I sort of hear echoing across your work and across your your decades of work and legacy. Tell me a little bit about exercise. I've read a fair bit in terms of your thoughts on reasons for exercise and reasons for walking, and how you've used both to sort of continue creating, creative space and output for yourself.
Yeah, there's a great quote from Murakami where he's talking about, running is both an activity and a metaphor. I sort of see it that way. I think exercise is a microcosm of sitting down to write a book. It's a microcosm of sitting down to start a company. It's a microcosm of trying to make a film, whatever it is. You are testing yourself and testing the world and seeing what you can do. And so, today, look, I'm gonna take an hour out of my day at least and exercise. I was at the gym for 50 minutes yesterday. Even though it's 100 and whatever outside, I'm gonna run. And I'm gonna enjoy running, but I also understand that sort of shutting my mind off in that way often allows for certain creative breakthroughs. So there's a reason that, typically entrepreneurs are in great shape and creative people are physically fit, I would say probably higher than average, because that drive, that energy that makes them good in what they do, there's diminishing returns when you write. You can't write for 15 hours a day. It just doesn't work. So what do you do with that energy when you start to slow down, midway through the day? You go swimming or you go for a walk, and these things make you healthy, but they also are an outlet for that sort of overflowing, force of life.
I want to sort of switch gears a little bit and move into some of your work on marketing, your work on PR. So, I mean, of course, clearly the topic of your first book, maybe even your first two books. How do you stay current with, I guess first question is, how much of your time is divided between writing and I guess maybe the rest of your life, and then marketing specifically and working in marketing, working in PR?
Let's say 50-50 probably.
50-50 creative and marketing?
50% my company, my marketing company, and 50% my writing and work. And sometimes I'm taking, I would say this is also more on the average, right? Sometimes I'm not writing because I'm taking a break or whatever. And sometimes I'm just writing because I have the deadline or whatever.
Got it. Yeah. And so then in your PR and marketing work, so much of what you've done is almost pre-predict where things are going, right? Before the idea of growth hacking became hip in Silicon Valley, you wrote a book about it. The recent sort of blow up around Gawker, you were there commenting on it. I was sort of following you on Twitter and seeing in real time what you were saying. I know so many people, sorry to interrupt. I know so many people get caught up and sort of lose themselves in doing nothing but just, following the media. And it seems like you have a balance. You have this incredible creative life.
Yeah, look, I think it's hard to just be an expert about something, writing about it. I think you also have to work in the field too. So I see the things as related.
And so your work in marketing, in PR, then influence your writing?
Yeah, of course. So, could I have written the Stoicism book if I was a tenured college professor living in sort of an academic bubble? I don't think so. I think it was working with clients and having the shit hit the fan and seeing things fail miserably and being stressed and overworked and mad and pissed off and hurt and excited and exhilarated, right? So, these are the ups and downs of life. And I think that good writing, especially nonfiction writing, which is supposed to be practical, has to be aware of that. So that I sort of, I when I'm writing my marketing books, obviously I definitely have to be working in the field, or they're going to be totally worthless. But in all my writing, I think the more real world experience I have, the more people I work with, the better, the better I do.
Yeah. Tell me about your note-taking system, your commonplace book.
So I read only physical books, and I mark the pages as I'm reading them, and then I transfer what I like from those books onto 4x6 note cards, and then I store those note cards by theme. So every one of my books is a box of note cards organized by themes, and those themes become, part 2, chapter 14, or part 2, chapter 16, or the conclusion, or the intro, or whatever. That's how I organize my thoughts. I don't use any sort of digital, like I don't use Evernote or anything like that.
And that's such an unorthodox. I've adopted your commonplace book. I use note cards too for marginalia for my books, for my physical books. But I'm also in Evernote all the time and in email more often than I would like, and et cetera. We all are. Why? Well, what? That is maybe as a small example, but you do so many things that are contrary to what is currently hip.
I don't care about that. I just work on what works for me. Like I got introduced to this system by Robert Greene, and it was how he wrote his books, and it worked for me. I put my own spin on it, and there it is. Like there's nothing that it doesn't do for me, aside from the fact that sometimes I drop the box and then I have to reorganize the cards. But it doesn't. Books are a technology. Ebooks are just a more recent technology, but there's nothing that the first technology is deficient in for me. So I don't feel the need to just do something just because it's new.
Yeah, I have nothing but admiration for the willingness to stay contemporary, in for example, your work, and then also no, this is just the discipline that I follow. This is whether in exercise or in your commonplace book, the regularity and reliability with which you have a system that works for you, and that's what you follow.
Yeah. Look, try to be yourself, right? Like, that means you're going to adopt some new things as soon as they come out because they make the most sense and you like them. And then other things you're going to say, I don't like that. I think I might be in the minority, but I think I'm right, and stick to it.
If you're willing to go into it, I'm curious about, I've read a couple of recent articles you've written about, you recently got married in March, so congratulations.
Thank you.
What does work-life balance look like for you? You say you're always working and maybe more than you should. What has that been, and what would you like that to be going forward?
It's hard. Work-life balance is harder when your life is your work, right? Like in that what you do in your life is also what you cover in your work. And it's harder when you work from home, and it's harder when you're, an entrepreneur or whatever. So it's always been a murky line. I think what I'm trying to work on is maybe when I'm working, I'm working, and when I'm not working, I'm not working. I'm trying to sort of draw that line. It's been helpful for me. I have an office now instead of just working from home. And so it's nice. It's like, look, I'm here, I'm working. I never thought I would like having a commute, but it's a nice sort of like transitionary process. And so that's something I'm trying to think about. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at least as a place to start.
Yeah.
Other than the transition between the home or the home and the office, what else do you do to draw that line for yourself?
I try to start winding down around like 5 or 6 o'clock. And so like if I am checking I try not to let anything stress me out after about 5 or 6 o'clock. So, some shit goes down in the middle of the day, fine, I'm going to deal with it. But if it goes down at 7, I'll deal with it tomorrow. There's something easy that I can bust out, I try to do it. But I'm trying. And the other thing for me, I try in the morning, I try to make sure that I do 1 or 2 things before I start work. So I could start checking email in bed. Obviously, anyone could who has a phone. But I'd rather get up and take a shower and have breakfast and maybe write in a journal or maybe play with my animals or talk to my wife a little bit before I dive into work. Because once you dive in, it's hard to get out, right? You're wet. And so I'm trying to draw that line.
Nice. You mentioned the animals. I wanted to touch on that. You have goats and chickens, is that right, in Austin?
I have goats, chickens, ducks, goose, rabbit, and I think that's it.
And I think that's fabulous.
I have 3 guineas too.
Yeah, I grew up on a small farm. I grew up around a lot of animals. But where did that come from for you, living in a city in Austin? That seems like an unusual thing for someone in his late 20s to do.
My wife's a big driver of it. She loves it, and I'll do anything that makes her happy. But I think it's fun. They're awesome. They teach you things. They're fun to play around with, and it's nice to have that in my life. So it started as like kind of a funny joke, and then it's become it's become a big part of our lives.
And what's one of the lessons that you've learned from having animals?
I think joy is a nice emotion that you see in animals. Just the ridiculousness, this is what I'm doing right now. That sort of thing.
Yeah. You talked also about sort of the strong emotions, when shit hits the fan, when something's on fire at work. If do you have a story of something like that was a challenge for you to face in the moment with one of your clients?
No, I mean, look, a lot of my clients, I get involved because there's a crisis of some kind, right? And so, nobody calls me because things are going well.
Huh.
Usually, right?
Yeah.
So that's when I have to get involved.
Well, okay, a couple of last questions.
Yeah.
You've been really generous with your time, and it's always such a pleasure to connect with you.
Yeah.
What does success look like for you in your life, in your future, right? You've had this, this incredible journey so far. What do you want next? Like what's shooting for the stars for you? And that could be anything.
I would say success for me is continuing to do what I want, right? Being able to follow the creative impulses that I have, to support the life that I want to have, and to not feel like I have to do anything that I don't want to do. That's success to me. Much less so than hitting this bestseller list or winning this award or making this amount of money. It's as long as I can continue doing what I'm doing, that's what I like.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. It's really a pleasure, and I think we'll just cap it there.
Awesome. Well, look, good luck with the podcast. You've got the perfect soothing radio voice, so I'll be curious to see how this goes.
Thank you very much. I haven't heard that. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Cool. I'll look forward to connecting again, Ryan. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Robin Zander Show. To join the newsletter and download free a copy of Robin's book, The Accelerated Learner, visit robinzander.co. We look forward to you joining us next time for more from Robin and his extraordinary guests.